Hello everyone! Last week in Tech was a bit insane, even the current standards. An AI company managed to leak its own coding tool and then turned GitHub into a mess trying to clean it up. IBM says that the quantum computer pulled off something people have been chasing for years. Microsoft is pushing harder its own AI model game. Mistral is going into the chip arms race, and somehow, in the middle of all that, we also have the people seriously talking about the AI data centers in orbit, because apparently Earth is starting to feel too small for this industry. Then we end the two lighter ones, an iPhone leak and the weird little ASUS AI gadget that looks like the kind of thing tech people buy. This is one of those weeks where the whole industry looks like the sprinting forward while dropping tools off its pockets. So let's go into it. Let's start with the mess, because it's one beautiful of the most possible way. The Anthropic, one of the big AI names that like the present itself is a serious, careful and responsible, accidentally leaked Claude Code, and then things got even dumper from there. According to the TechCrunch, the company started going after the thousands of GitHub repositories while trying to pull the leaked code back. And what followed was exactly of the kind of chaos and would expect when a fast-moving AI company suddenly has to panic in the public. TechCrunch reports that Anthropic said that takedowns were accidental, but that point that the damage was already done. It is not just the code leaked. That alone would already be bad enough for a company building high-profile AI products. The bigger problem is the contrast. The companies love talking about the safety, trust and responsibility, alignment, and all the polished words. Then, the second something real goes wrong, the scene starts looking a lot less like a carefully managed future and a lot more like somebody spilling gasoline while holding a lighter. The Guardians and Axios both frame this as a scramble, and that word fits. It did not look like a calm response from the company fully in control. It looks like the company trying to shut up the door after the room was already full of smoke. And honestly, this is the part that matters most. The AI race is moving so fast that everyone wants to look unstoppable. Of course, everybody says that they will be the company who building the future. But stories like this are a reminder that underneath all the giant promises, a lot of this industry is still held together with stress, velocity, and people hoping nothing breaks too loudly. And one of the companies shaping the next wave of developer tools cannot keep its own code under control without settings of GitHub mess. This is not just embarrassing, it tells you something real about how overheated this whole space has become. Now let's start switch from the chaos of something that sounds a lot more serious, because IBM just dropped one of those stories that makes quantum computing feel slightly less like a science for the fair billionaires. IBM says its quantum computer accurately simulated a real magnetic material and reproduced data from the national lab. This matters because this is exactly the kind of thing of the field has been promising for years, not just weird demos and abstract math, but real scientific use on real physical system. And no, does not mean that quantum computers are about to replace everything on the next month. We are do not looking of the nonsense, but the conversation gets a little harder to laugh off. Because for the long time, quantum computers had this pattern where every update sounded impressive, until you tried to explain what this actually changed. This one is cleaner, a real material, real lab data and real results that line up closely enough to make people pay attention. This is a lot more convincing than another round of trust us, this will matter eventually. What makes it interesting is that it hints the field right where it always been weakness usefulness. Quantum computer has never had a marketing problem. It had a credibility problem. There always been money, ambitions and giant promises. But the harder part was showing something that feels grounded enough for normal people to hear and think, alright, this at least sounds real. So, while the half of tech wood is busy fighting over AI chips and model launching, IBM just reminded everyone that there is another race running in parallel, and it is not frozen, it is a may quietly become a lot more important once of the result sounds theoretical. Now the Microsoft, because apparently being tied of OpenAI is no longer enough fun on its own. Last week's Microsoft showed off the three new foundation models, and it was a signal they clearly want more control over its own AI stack, and the company is getting less subtle about that. One of the names getting attention is the BitNet, which pushes the idea that models can be made much lighter and more efficient without completely falling apart. Then there is a Magma, which aims on the multimodal agents and points toward of the kind of system that do not just process the text, but handle images, context, and actual more fluidly. Put that all together with the rest of Microsoft AI push, and the message is pretty obvious. They do not want to just rent intelligence from somebody else forever. And honestly, that was always going to happen. No company that big wants to sit near the center of AI boom while depending too heavily on an outside partner of the most important layer. That might work for a while, but eventually the instinct kicks in. You want your own models, so you own the leverage to fall back the plan. Then preferably your own quote to the cheaper inference in the market gets uglier. And that is why the looks like. So yes, the model matter, but more interesting parts of mood behind them. Microsoft is actually like the company that has decided to the next phase of AI will be too important to leave half controlled. And once company at this level start building more of their core pieces, the whole field gets the more competitive and probably a lot messier. Which to be fair, has been a pretty reliable themes later. Now Mistral, because Europe clearly looked at the AI race and decided it was tired of being the guy in the group who projects and say, I can help with the slides. The French company just raised 80-30 billions in debt, and big part of that is going toward a new data center near the parish, leading for 13,800 Nvidia chip. That is not a quite stat update. It's a very loud statement that Mistral wants infrastructure and real seat at the table where the big AI players keep scaling like the lunatics. For a while, Europe's role in AI has felt a little awkward. A lot of talk of regulations, plenty of smart people, but not really enough heavyweight infrastructure compared of the US giants. So when Mistral starts stacking debt to build our serious compute, it stops look like the company that just wants to make nice models and starts looking a company that understands what this race actually costs. Because the point, nobody gets to stay relevant on vibes alone. Not in AI. You need a chips, power, money, cooling, and all of the kind funding plan that would have sounded slightly unwell 5 years ago. That is what makes this a bigger story of the French AI startup raises the money. It's about Europe trying to prove it can still matter once in the race from demos and headlines into the hard infrastructure. And if Mistral pulls off, the company stops being just the interesting European AI name and starts looking a lot more like a serious regional counterweight. And now we get to the part of the news that sounds fake until you realize people are seriously discussing it. AI data centers in the orbit, because apparently giant server farms on Earth are no longer enough at the headache. And now the conversation is drifting toward putting compute into the space. Reuters reported one of the idea is the next contest of SpaceX and orbital infrastructure, with the pitch being pretty simple. If resources are becoming bottleneck on the Earth, then maybe the answer is to move some of this madness out of the planet, with the either bold and sane or both. It captures the exact mood of the AI race right now. Demand for compute is so aggressive and the infrastructure burden is getting so absurd that ideas, which would have sounded like the sci-fi not so long ago, are suddenly getting discussed with a straight face. Now routers are also the point of the orbital data centers would run into the plenty in the same ugly realities that kill the ambition of tech projects on the Earth, and all fun details people like to skip when they say something like could change everything. So no, it is not me telling you that cloud computer is moving towards on the space on the next Tuesday, and it is not talking about the fairy stories. What it is, true is the perfect sign of where the pressure is going. When the industry starts seriously entertaining and the server farms in orbit, you are no longer just looking at the normal growth phase. You are looking at the field pushing so hard against physical limits and even ridiculous ideas that sounds usable. And that is a very specific kind of crazy. Now for the something lighter, because no Tech Week is complete without Apple leaks showing up every enough to make the current phone feel old for no reason. The latest one says the iPhone 18 Pro could come with a noticeable display changes, and even though is a still leak theory, it fits the usual Apple pattern pretty well. The company almost never screams about the radical change all at once. It prefers to send settings down, hide the seams, and then make the update feel unreal on the time it ships. This is why these rumors always travel so well. On paper, it's just like the display tweak. In practice, people immediately start reading the bigger message onto it. The Apple getting closer to the cleaner front design, and this is another step towards making the phone look less like a device full of visible compromise and more like the one clean surface. And that is the part that keeps people hooked. Apple leaks are rarely exciting because the raw specs alone. They not work because everybody knows Apple will eventually turn a small hardware changes into the giant design narrative and sell it like the future arrived quietly overnight. So no, this is not the biggest story of the last weeks, but this is exactly the kind of rumor people latch onto because it hints at the where Apple wants the product to go next. And Apple still the one of the few companies that can make the display change feel like the cultural event. And then we have the ASUS, which show it off one of those products that makes you stop for a second and ask whether this is the future or just a very committed side quest. It is called the U-Gen 300's USB AI accelerator, and the idea is simple enough. Plug into small device and get low-power local AI inference off the edge without needing some giant dedicated machine sitting on your desk. ASUS is pitching it is a compact way to run generative AI workloads more efficiently across a wider range of devices. What makes it interesting is not this one gadget is going to change the world by itself. It is what the product looks like the show where the market wants to go. Not every company wants to say every task of the cloud forever, and now every user wants AI to mean buy a much bigger computer. This is a growing push toward more local and practical ways of running AI, especially for people who care about the latency, privacy, or just not turning every tiny task into another server bill. So, this little ASUS device is not a headline monster, but it is more like a glimpse on the weird hardware layer that starts appearing once AI stops being just a big company obsession and starts spreading into the normal products and accessories. And honestly, that is the usual when the technology starts getting real. Not when the biggest press conference happens, but when smaller hardware starts quietly showing up and trying to solve specific problems. So that was the news for last weeks. Anthropic managed to turn a code leak into the public mess. IBM gave the quantum computing one of the most convincing models in the wild. Microsoft kept pushing toward more control over their own AI future. Mistral threw serious money and infrastructure, and industry got weird enough that orbital data centers are now the part of conversation. Then, just to keep things balanced, Apple did what they always does and shows up through the leaks, while the Asus brought one of the odd little AI hardware that usually hints that AI everywhere and markets start drifting next. That is probably the cleanest way to describe tech right now. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe and we will see you on the next week.